So Cam, in the last week we've canvassed the hockey public of Australia. We've been asking for them to submit their questions, and we've some great questions. We've got the next week while to answer them. We'll get through as many as we can, covering everything from the commercial side of the sport to high performance and the grassroots participation.
Sounds good. Sounds like a nice little grilling coming up, so I'm looking forward to it.
So let's start with probably one of the most common questions we get is around why the Kookaburras and the Hockey Roos play so often in Perth. And the question comes from David Gilbert in Sydney. He says, why is it that the Kookaburras rarely play on the eastern seaboard when more than half the population lives there?
Yeah, so a very good question, and one we receive a fair bit of. So the main reason is really the turnaround in time for how some of these test matches are organised and booked. So the requests can come in from international countries on short notice to want to play us, and obviously if we agree, it can be a really short turnaround to try to make it work purely from a budget perspective to take it out of Perth. That's where both the teams are based. A number of the Asian countries that we play there also find it easy to go direct to Perth. But having said all of that, a key focus for us is to make sure that we have content spread around the country. I mean, that is something I'm really determined to achieve as quickly as we can. Hopefully we'll see some signs of that in 2015, and each year will grow, and it's about, as the question said, it's not just the eastern seaboard, it's South Australia, it's the whole country. And we're really determined that we'll find a way that will show content being spread around the country and increased as well. So more test matches in Australia, potentially different tournaments that we can create and run ourselves.
To watch the space from next year onwards.
Definitely, and I'm really committed to it and very comfortable to be publicly held accountable to it as well.
And another one that's a bit of a bugbear for the, rightly so, from the Australian public is around the hockey's media coverage and the coverage of our two significantly credible national teams. Questions here from Kim Goes in Rockhampton. Why is it so difficult to get hockey recognised in the media? What's the plan for Hockey Australia to raise the media profile in Australia? And that's from Mark Smith. So there's a couple of questions there.
Yeah, so it's a challenge for the sport globally, no doubt about that. From a television perspective, we're not where we should be. Both the people asking the questions are correct. The sport should be covered at a greater level, and we need to find a way to, and we've talked about it internally, about creating that relevance to our own people and then the broader market to ensure television's, it's a commercial vehicle in a large part for everything that they do. So we need to make sure we've got a product that is relevant to them from a ratings perspective, from generating advertising, etc. So the content is obviously great. Hockey's a good sport to cover. Again, it's part of what we need to work on with our current broadcast partners, with FIH, and find our way. And the other one is the online streaming. So we've started to do that pretty consistently. That is a vehicle to communicate content. Big part of what we want to achieve in 2015 is to find our vehicle, the right mechanism that we can consistently have content out there and build that towards as much television as possible. And we also need to look at television as not just free-to-air coverage, but really strong highlights packages and other ways to get through the hockey community as well as the broader sports fan.
And you've just talked about there with live streaming. One of the questions that's come in is from Brian Baker in Perth. He says it was great to do the streaming, but the picture quality was poor, and he was disappointed with the commentary. Could we be looking at voice of hockey in the near future? How will that play out? Yeah,
so streaming, as we've just touched on, is a current way, and I think a good way to communicate. We do need to find the right ways to do that, and so the onus is on us to find the right partners. No point having content if it's not at a good quality, and with something that's resonated not just probably through the questions, but also through getting around and speaking to different people in the hockey community, is that it's one thing to have it covered, but you really need to have that hockey flavour to it. So it's the camera angles, the people producing know the sport, can cover the sport well, and the commentary and everything around it. Obviously people have different opinions on who's a good commentator and who's not. Definitely not my place to comment on that. My desire is to find ways that the sport is broadcast that is really relevant for hockey community and the hockey world. Go, this is great, because if that happens, the rest of the sporting world will jump on board as well. So it is a good question. We will continue to work and find the right broadcast streams to do it. Some of the challenges are logistical. They are venue, they are short turnarounds, but at the end of the day, I'm responsible and accountable to make sure that the content's as good as it can be if we're going to put our name to it.
Question from Bridget Watkins in Perth. Have you ever considered a supporter membership of sorts, and perhaps including open training sessions for the kids, meet and greets with the players, access to other events, posters, newsletters, discounts, etc.?
The answer is yes, certainly from my background. So I've come from professional sporting clubs where membership is a key driver. I believe a membership product would be outstanding for this sport. I mean, what better way to connect than through our two national teams, one being a male team, one being a female team, all the things that you could do with that. So that is on the horizon. I think it was Bridget you said. Might even give her a call in the future around a possible role once we get that up and running, because that is, I think, is a genuine way to tick a lot of boxes for the sport that a lot of national sports don't do, and we probably should. It's a priorities thing at the moment, but rest assured that one is absolutely on the agenda, and I'm very happy that question's been asked, so thanks.
Okay, Cam, so moving on to participation. We'll start with the big picture. Lachlan Jennings in Brisbane asks, how are you going to get more people to play hockey?
Well, that's two most important things that I should be doing is hoping that, or driving our national teams to success and driving our participation numbers up. So we've set a big target of 250,000 participants in 2018, at the end of 2018. So it's a huge figure. That's a big challenge. So key drivers, you've got the current key driver around formalised 11-a-side club hockey, and we punch above our weight. We have over 100,000 people playing in club season during the year, so that's a really important part. But what we really need to do is to support that and add to that by other forms of hockey. So hooking to hockey, our grassroots program is obviously critical. We have a great product that can get bigger and better. Our integration into the schools is probably one of our most untapped areas, not just as Hockey Australia, but through our state and territory association, so I see that as critically important. And then what I call stick and ball, which is really how can we encourage people to be engaged in the sport through stick and ball type concepts. So one that's been kicked around, and I know there's a few states that are looking to try it around hockey fives, but it's anything that's about encouraging people to play in a less formal sense, so in a social sort of format, reduced numbers, reduced size in the pitch, and that'll be a key part of our strategy moving forward. So myself and Ben Hartung, our General Manager of Hockey, are putting a lot of time into presenting and developing a strategy that is really going to support that and can be articulated through the whole hockey communities, because it's the states, it's the territories, it's the clubs and the associations that will drive this, whether it's through formal hockey or these informal schools, etc. But we've got to think outside the square. That's probably the summary of that answer. Get a stick in somebody's hand, playing the sport, engaged in the sport, and we can increase that number in a significant way that will benefit at all levels.
And while clearly Hockey Australia has the responsibility, I guess, to lead in this area, you've alluded to it there, but the importance of the energies and the work that's done further down the pyramid, if you like, state associations, local regional associations, and then clubs themselves. Yeah, and look, one of the things is that clubs, I'd like to promote more what the really good clubs are doing, big, small and in between. There's so many great stories out there about how clubs are getting kids into their clubs or their associations and driving the sport. And I think at times there's a bit of a stigma with hockey that it needs a synthetic pitch, it needs a lot of infrastructure, it needs this and that to get people engaged. And I just keep hearing of all these different stories how people are getting people engaged in hockey that are away from sort of structured environments. So part of our responsibility to lead is to publish, promote and really put those stories out there so that others can learn from it, and through the various other forums that we have with our states and territories. There's a question here from Jerome Buck in Perth, who asks, have you ever considered creating a national clubs knockout competition similar to the FFA Cup and FA Cup? Yeah, so interesting question, that one, because a club champion, national champion has been raised and I think been considered in the past, and is certainly starting to work with some other sports. So
it is a balancing act, and I really don't want these answers to be around cost and what we can afford, budget and all of that. But in this case, it starts becoming, it's a competition question that has really strong commercial implications. Can we afford to do it? Does it generate revenue? Will it generate exposure and interest in the sport? So it hasn't been ruled out. It hasn't certainly been ruled in. It is. You think of it in that space around competition and what we can do to promote the sport. You look at everything. So that will be one that will be considered. Has been considered. We don't have the definitive answer yet in how to make something like that come alive. So that's probably the best I can give at the moment, without really thinking about it and being able to present it in a bit more detail.
And there's a couple of questions around another form of the game, indoor hockey. So one of which was anonymous and one which came from Pam in Brisbane. But Pam asked, why doesn't Hockey Australia encourage more participation and support for indoor hockey?
Yeah, so I suppose firstly, thanks for the question. I think it was from Pam and Anonymous. Some of these questions I'd like to be able to respond to in a bit more detail. So it doesn't help if it's anonymous, unfortunately, because I won't be able to maybe put a bit more context and depth to the answer. So indoor hockey is part of participation for us, no doubt about that. Again, I talked before about stick and ball. People are playing indoor hockey, that's hockey. So it is a priorities issue for us when it does come to indoor hockey. Obviously the weighted numbers is around club hockey. Our funding is around high performance, is around 11-a-side hockey. So a lot of what we do is really driven around 11-a-side outdoor hockey, if you like. So it's not that we don't want to put more into indoor, and we do. We have a tremendous indoor support advisory group headed up by Lynn Hill. They do a fantastic job, and we would like to help them out more. We're juggling priorities in this space, and it is a difficult one. I've just come back from a congress overseas. I know indoor hockey is huge in Germany. Internationally, it probably needs a push along, again, from the governing body. It needs more than just Australia to go, let's get behind indoor. But we see indoor as part of participation. We have a big participation target. If indoor can be part of that, we will absolutely be behind it in a bigger and better way.
This one's another anonymous one, and it's probably more difficult to answer, but there's a question around the Hockey Ed system, around improving that umpiring system, getting more umpires into the system. Currently the question submission says it's too costly and failing to produce enough umpires.
Yeah, so that's a tough question, certainly to answer in a short space of time, so that we don't have a mini series in this Q&A. So the Hockey Ed side, I'm probably going to just leave at the minute, except to say that from a technology side of things, whether it's our national database or these supporting systems in and around it, we know we've got a lot of work to do, and they need to be as efficient as they possibly can, but have effective outcomes. And I accept that they don't, and in the Hockey Ed space there's a fair bit of work to be done. So the broader question around officials and umpiring is really important to me, and is something that we will continue to focus on. Because we have such a strong participation target, you need the infrastructure around it, and sometimes we get distracted by facilities and clubs as far as when it comes to infrastructure, all really important, but so is umpiring and officials, and having as many as we can come through. I think it's an engagement in the sport that's really important, and does lead to high performance outcomes. We're proud of the top level umpires at men's and women's and at youth and at indoor and wherever it might be. So umpiring officials is important. The technology or the database behind it therefore is part of that. We will address that, but in a broader focus around how can we drive more umpires, more officials into the sport.
Question here comes from Nick Miller in Brisbane, who says, how is Hockey Australia ensuring the performance of regional associations to help maximise participation, compared to, say, the AFL, which essentially centralises everything at AFL headquarters? For example, is Hockey Australia across the Brisbane Hockey Association points cap and its impact on participation, restraint of trade?
Wow, that is a tough question. Probably break it into two parts. There's the focus around regional centres, and then there's the focus on the Brisbane, or the competition's points cap. So very difficult for me to answer the second part of that. So I'm not aware of the issue that Nick is talking about. So I will follow that one up with Hockey Queensland. So the state and territory associations are responsible for competitions in their states and regions, etc. So we tend not to delve too much into the ins and outs of how they run it, but we do need to be across it if there are potential issues. So it's certainly one that I'll have to follow up with Hockey Queensland. The first part of the question I can answer around regional centres. I think one of the absolutely untapped strengths in this sport of hockey in Australia is regional centres and areas. We see it at a high performance level, we see it at a participation level, and I want to try and bring it out even more in potentially how we place some of our international content and almost tie all our strategic pillars to having a stronger regional focus as Hockey Australia. So I certainly take that responsibility on from a national perspective, which does impact participation. So the question sort of talked a little bit around its impact on participation, which certainly gets my attention because, as we talked about earlier, the participation target is strong. Participation is a legacy of my time and what you do in sport. So I'm very determined to tackle those sorts of issues. It's just difficult, hopefully that people would appreciate, for me to wade in on individual competition issues run in a particular state or territory, but it's been raised. I will contact Hockey Queensland and try to get some background on the topic, and potentially follow up with the person that asked the question and left their name, which is a good thing.
So Cam, moving on to the high performance side of things, there's a lot of questions coming on the Australian Hockey League, on the AHL. Just to pull a few of them, Oliver Lane in Hobart asks, will the AHL be expanded and go back to home and away? So it's probably worth explaining why it isn't just now. And there's another question here around, do you think the AHL will ever go to a franchise format with a player auction or draft?
Good question, and very relevant from someone in Hobart, considering their men just won the AHL. So I'm not sure they'd want to change anything with how things are going. So home and away format has been raised by a number of people. It's probably the model you'd love to see, because we'd love to see states being able to play at home, bring back the national players, and play in front of good home crowds. On a regular basis. It's clearly a really tough model financially, and a number of sports have really hurt their sport, I should say, at all levels, because they go down these sort of models that on paper seem great, but they just financially don't stack up. So again, we're trying to focus, how can we make the AHL more important, more relevant, broader exposure, etc. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I do see it as difficult at the moment. I think the second part was around franchises and going down that path. So again, you don't rule it out, and you look at it. I know the AHL has had a format like that in the past. Other sports have approached that. Obviously in India, the Hockey India League is based around franchises. So I do have a liking for that model to be considered. I think it's a way to potentially rejuvenate and get the sport at, if you like, our national level back in front of television, back in front of the broader media, and hopefully bringing younger people to the game who want to play the game and are interested in the game. So I look, both questions are relevant without me being able to give a black and white answer, unfortunately, because the AHL taking it to another level is how we can continuously improve the AHL is something that's really important to me and important to the people around Hockey Australia. So it's a long-winded answer to say I don't have the answer, but I'm very determined to try to keep.
Jane Patton in Hobart asks, young athletes develop at different ages, some will bloom later with some additional coaching input. To Jane, it appears that current identification is too focused at Junior World Cup age group only.
Might have to disagree slightly with Jane there. I do like the question though, because it brings up a broader issue. So I think from a Junior World Cup perspective, clearly really important to us, and we have a focus on it. But our focus on development and through our pathways is much broader than Junior World Cup. We have regular camps, regular development series. In fact, we'd like to have more international matches for developing and emerging athletes, and it's much broader than the Junior World Cup. In fact, a key focus, I think, in sport now is to make sure that you aren't just focused on, you don't put a deadline on when athletes can develop, and a number of the states now are driving supporting programs that are to capture those athletes that maybe haven't quite made it at a national level, or through the State Institute of Sport network, which again is another important way for us to have our athletes developing, and there's no Junior World Cup cut-off age there. So there's probably 3 or 4 different ways as a sport that we nationally and through our states and territories target and try to develop athletes that it's not Junior World Cup focused. And she is right, athletes do develop later in some cases. We see it all the time in sport. Hockey's no different to that. We have a strong national identification program that really isn't age dependent.
Right, Cam, so that wraps up our Q&A for the month. But just give us your thoughts on some of the questions we've had, and hopefully maybe do some more of this in the future.
Good questions, challenging questions. So I do appreciate it. I think it's really important from my perspective that our organisation increases its engagement with the people that play the sport. One of the best ways to know more about it is to be questioned on it. So I appreciate the time people have put into it. I know we haven't been able to probably answer all the questions, and some of the answers can be really short. So again, I'd like us to continue to do this down the path. Whether probably weekly might upset my wife if I'm away from family too much, but on a regular basis would be great, because it's a great way for us to grow as an organisation. We don't sit here or in Perth in high performance and go, we know everything. We don't need to listen to what people are out there in the hockey world experiencing or thinking about. So I just encourage people to use this forum as a chance to ask questions. I do encourage them to leave their names. I think it's important. I appreciate sometimes they might not want to, but obviously it's very difficult for me to respond to an anonymous question. So I've enjoyed it. Some of these have been challenging, so that's good for me. And I'm a person who also reflects and thinks back on some of these questions as well in a more deeper sort of fashion about what we do need to do and think about. A question like the indoor was a really good example of that. So thanks everyone for asking the questions. Use this forum in the future. Challenge me, I like it. We grow as an organisation.